everybody, Marcus here. Now I want to remind everybody of our pact that for every 1,000 subscribers I receive on this channel, I will give away one copy of Cyberlink's PowerDirector 13 Ultra software. So please consider liking this video, sharing it, subscribing, or even just listening to the very end. So one of the issues that has not been explored within the MGTOW community, other than in passing comments, is the issue of leaving a legacy. Now, I'm not referring to a legacy that will remain due to MGTOW as a group, but to the legacies that each individual men going their own way intend to leave. Now, every person desires for their life to have meaning, a purpose of some sort, something that gives you a justification for your own existence. The existential writer Albert Camus asks in The Myth of Sisyphus, "What reason do I have to not kill myself?" It is this very question that comes from the positive philosophical project to overcome nihilism. I mean, if you are a Christian, the answer is quite simple. God forbids it, and if I kill myself, I will go straight to hell. For an atheist, however, this answer just doesn't work. One can take two approaches in dealing with this question. The first and most common approach is the equivalent of sticking your head in the sand and pretending the question is a non-question. I consider half-assed answers such as, because life is good, or people would be sad if I died, or why would you kill yourself? These and similar answers, I would stick in the category of classifying it as a non-question. The second approach to answering the question of suicide is to actually attempt to find some reason. Finding meaning or purpose to one's life is one such answer. It is a justification of your existence to yourself. Having this justification obviously is important because it can dramatically change the tone of your existential experience. If your sole reason to stay alive is a fear of death, then you are condemning yourself to a painful existence, and that's all it will be to you. Existence. Hollow, cruel, pointless, depressing existence. When you think about it, slaving at a job to feed yourself, experiencing a plethora of unpleasant emotions, a sleep deprivation, sickness, betrayal, disappointment, stress. Having to endure all these things is a major hassle and better have a point to it. You could opt for a hedonistic justification. You could say to yourself that there are so many pleasures in life that they outweigh the displeasures. Sure, that's a great answer. Well, for someone who wishes to abdicate their humanity and make themselves an honorary animal, the middle point between monkey and man. To the rest of us, however, this answer just won't do. Leaving a legacy, however, gives meaning. It gives you a purpose. It makes your life a project. Now, you can ask yourself why the hell you should want to leave a legacy. You leave a legacy in defiance. In the defiance of the perceived absurdity of life, as Camus indicates, in defiance of the hubris of man in believing that we have it all figured out, that our science has given us all the answers, and it's all just a bunch of spinning atoms and nothing more. The sheer audacity of man to succumb to its own hypocrisy in branding our ancestors savages while thinking ourselves as enlightened. Who will be the savage in 1,000 years when our progeny reflects on this time? Who, I ask you? Well, us today. That's who. Every period in time thinks itself correct, like a petulant child sired by times past, gazing back at their parents like some backward know-nothings. This is what you are in defiance of. You leave a legacy to spite the present, honor the past, and ensure a future in hopes that one day man will overcome himself. It's one big fuck you to human weakness. Many men look upon children as their legacy. This, I believe, is the orthodox, out-of-the-box go-to answer that I suspect people default to, without giving it much of a second thought. It's a cruise control response to the issue of one's legacy, and personally, I find it wholly unsatisfying. The notion of one's immortality has been often associated with children. However, I will put forward a simple argument that I hope will show a better option. Now, to leave a legacy, or in other words, immortalize oneself as far as, anything can truly be immortalized within the human sphere, implies that a portion of your identity, or your ego, survives your death. Now, children, however, possess their own identity, as each child is their own being. As such, your ego, if in any part is mirrored within the child, will nonetheless be twisted sufficiently that even while you are still alive, you may not see yourself in your child. Of course, you will see yourself in your child, any child for that matter, to the extent that you were a child once yourself, and recognize that aspect. But it is not truly your ego you are seeing, but a projection of your conscious mind on someone on a path that you have already been on. It is not you that you see, it is the path that you see in the child. As to leaving behind your genetic material, well, if you subscribe to a materialist metaphysics, then perhaps you can only remain through leaving behind matter. If this, however, is your intention, then you're better off having your body frozen or donated to science. I mean, your skeleton can adorn a 5th grade science class somewhere for a long time past your death. However, if you are subscribed to materialism, there's another reason why leaving behind your genetic material is not really much good in terms of immortalizing yourself. The human genome is finite. This means that it is possible, though statistically small, that the genetic makeup of a child of yours could come into existence in the child of different people. Also, your descendants may not procreate and your line ends anyways. Most strikingly, however, is that it's not much of a legacy if you think about it. Is the pinnacle achievement of your existence merely the enactment of a biological function you were born with? Is your intention to claim credit for any greatness you hope your children to achieve? I mean, if children is your legacy, then for the love of God, go big. I mean, start donating sperm across the world as often as possible. Why leave 1 or 2 kids behind when you can have hundreds, if not thousands of them through the sperm bank system? Another argument to the general insignificance of children as a legacy goes as follows. If your son is your legacy, then you are your father's legacy. If your grandson is also your legacy, and every descendant down the line, then your son is also the legacy of your father, grandfather, and every ancestor before them. Your son then becomes a shared legacy, with your part being one in however many thousands led up to him. If you work construction and say worked on the Empire State Building along 999 other men, would you then truly call the Empire State Building your legacy? But if your child is only your legacy and not your father's and so on, then your legacy dies with your son. Considering latent genes and the dilution of them with the bloodline of the mother, I mean, you really are shooting pretty low by sinking your purpose into genetics. Each generation further dilutes your genetic material as your posterity breed with different lines. I mean, within a few generations, there's virtually little left of you. Perhaps you think a child is a legacy because if raised correctly, will be a great and positive force in the world. I mean, this argument has been considered by Socrates in several of the Platonic dialogues under the question, can virtue be taught? Now, the argument goes as follows. If virtue can be taught, then surely there are teachers of virtue. Those teachers of virtue would necessarily need to know what virtue is. And so a virtuous person surely knows what virtue is. So a virtuous person should be able to teach it. Now, what Socrates does next is point out an interesting phenomenon. There have been very affluent, virtuous men who ended up with miserable sons. I mean, surely a man of virtue and means has all the conditions necessary to teach virtue to the child themselves, or be able to afford to hire a virtuous person to teach their child for them. So how do these virtuous, affluent men end up with shitty sons? I mean, courageous men with cowards for progeny, just men with tyrants for progeny. I mean, sinking your hopes that you will raise a virtuous child presupposes that child is made of the stuff to begin with. So is it really you or chance that leads to a virtuous child? What about the memory of you? Donating sperm won't have you remembered. Is that what you would call a legacy then, being remembered? I mean, this also yields little hope where children are concerned, for at the most, it will only be your grandchildren who will have any living memory associated with you. The memory of you fades into oblivion with them. There is, however, a better way to secure one's memory than through children, and that is to become discoverable. To be discoverable, your name and your existence must be the answer to a chain of questions. Who invented the TV? Where did the Pythagorean theorem come from? I mean, questions like that ultimately can place you as the answer and cause of the answer itself. This is a vastly superior way of securing a memory to you. The scope of the people who are potentially asking this question is the reach of your legacy. Anyone who owns a TV or knows of TVs is someone who is affected by a legacy, and as such a candidate to discover its efficient cause. But to be discoverable as an efficient cause to something, one actually needs to be an efficient cause to something. Though having a child makes you discoverable through the questioning of a family tree, your name is not the last answer. The questioning continues down as far back as can be traced. You are merely one stepping stone. So in my opinion, children are not a meaningful trigger for discoverability. However, even the discoverability of your name is not your legacy, but merely a consequence of it. No, your legacy is the perpetual impact on people's lives your existence continues to have past your death. Now, it is all well and good to talk of these, massive legacies left behind by Charles Jenkins or Walt Disney, Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and so forth. But I think we all know that very few of us will ever leave such legacies. What is within grasp of virtually every MGTOW, however, is a single act of magnificence. Now, those who are not inclined to invent, generate ideas, or create art, or produce any tangible artifacts that would lead to a legacy still generate some level of wealth throughout their life. You may lead a life of playing video games or work a full-time job and save money for a rainy day. Well, what happens with that money you save for old age? See, I'm not talking about millions, but say even the selling cost of your house, $200,000 to $400,000. If you have children, you may choose to leave these things to them, or you might not want to leave money to them for whatever reason. Actually, in fact, I can give you a good reason not to leave inheritance to your children. Fighting over inheritance can destroy families, turn brother against brother, mother against son. I mean, this has happened in my family, and I have seen it happen in other families as well. And I'm sure you have seen it as well. If your children resent you for this, then I think that tells you all you need to know about them deserving it in the first place. Entitled children should not be obliged. So, what happens with this wealth when you near death? Now, a MGTOW man, one who has abstained from skirt-chasing expenditures such as fancy cars, designer clothes, and so forth, may very well find themselves with a nest egg that at the end of his years he finds little use for. I mean, the notion that you will spend your retirement years traveling and blowing money left and right on living is most likely never going to happen. Your energy levels will be lower. Your intent at the point of spending money that you saved will differ from your original intent when you had put that money away 20 years prior, and your health might act against you. Also, I suspect that with the ever-encroaching sense of one's mortality, the idea of fulfilling some sensual desire will give way to a desire to give meaning to your life, and therefore a desire to leave a legacy. I believe there's a fallacious assumption that people carry throughout their lives when it comes to, old age. A contradiction that I never hear pointed out. We say that the older you get, the more set in your ways you become. We observe this constantly. Now, a life spent living modestly and a habit of saving, reinforced through decades of repetition, will not disappear as soon as you hit retirement. You will continue to live out the same habits and possibly acquire a much stronger sense of urgency in finding purpose as you no longer have a job that has been fueling some of that purpose in your life. Yet when some people talk of retirement and what they will be doing when they retire, they're describing a completely different person than the one that is needed to enable that retirement. They describe a retired globe-trotting spendthrift, but lived the life of a minimalist homebody. No, if you are a minimalist homebody leading up to old age, you will most likely be a minimalist homebody in old age. So now you are left with an unspent nest egg, a creeping sense of your own mortality, plenty of free time, and little to no external force driving purpose in your life. This is where that single act of magnificence comes in. Magnificence was first distinguished from magnanimity by Plato and later elaborated on by Aristotle. Magnificence is a virtue, and probably the least practiced virtue in the world because it usually requires money to enact. A magnificent act is usually described as the allocation of private funds to some public works benefiting the community as a whole. This could be as lavish as building a hospital to as modest as commissioning a statue to be placed in a public park. In either case, you need money. Now, this act of magnificence, if nothing else you have achieved in life, can be your legacy. I'm not suggesting, by the way, donating to charity, as there's nothing of oneself in how such money would be spent, most likely on administrative overhead. No, I suggest some concrete act. Build that hospital if you have the funds. Commission a statue, some wondrous work of beauty, and set it in a park somewhere, or build a park somewhere to add beauty to a concrete jungle. Why not open a school on a specific subject you love that you feel is needed in the world but is never taught in school? Or publish a journal themed in that subject by collecting essays from representatives in that field. You could donate a library to an elementary school and have it named after you. Remember, you are enacting an act of magnificence, not starting a business. Enact something that makes you discoverable, something that puts your name as the answer to a question, and think in terms of your act elevating the human condition. Hell, if there is a MGTOW project somewhere in the works by then, use your nest egg to make that place better. Perhaps your act of magnificence can be setting up a bunch of solar panels to make the houses in MGTOW self-sustaining. This sort of legacy is completely within reach of most MGTOW. And I see it as an inspiring goal to work towards, a goal worth working and saving for, even though you don't know what the object of your act is. Magnificence is a crowning virtue, according to Aristotle, and is most certainly aligned with virtus, or as I explained in an earlier video, manliness, as the Romans called it. Magnificence acts are respected and loved by all who witness them. Not even a cynic can argue with such an act. True, they may argue with the object of the act, but not with the act itself. You can't take money to the grave, but you can leave a legacy with it. So, let me know what you plan on doing with your nest egg, because I think you get the idea of what I plan on doing with mine. Thanks for listening. Go team.